The blood-red sunset stained the horizon as Emma Vance's trembling fingers tightened around the handle of her father's whiskey bottle, knowing what would happen when he discovered it missing. At 23, she had spent most of her life bearing the brunt of Jeremiah Vance's violent temper, but tonight something within her had finally snapped. The year was 1878, and Genoa, Nevada was no place for a woman alone, but Emma had begun to wonder if even the untamed wilderness might be kinder than another night under her father's roof. Emma hurried toward the small creek that ran behind their property, intent on emptying the bottle before her father returned from the saloon. The spring air carried a chill as dusk settled over the Sierra Nevada foothills. Her heart raced with each step, knowing she was committing an act of defiance that would surely earn her another beating. "What do you think you're doing with that?" The voice behind her made Emma's blood run cold. She turned to see her father standing there, his face contorted with rage, swaying slightly from the whiskey he'd already consumed. I was just—" Emma stammered, clutching the bottle to her chest. "Thieving from your own father." Jeremiah's voice rose as he advanced on her, his weathered face red with anger. "After all I've done for you," Emma took a step back, "you've done nothing but make my life miserable since Mother died." Her words seemed to snap something inside him. His hand shot out, connecting with her cheek with enough force to send her sprawling to the ground. The bottle flew from her grasp, landing intact in the dirt nearby. "You ungrateful little—" Jeremiah bent to retrieve his precious whiskey, then straightened, looming over his daughter. "I gave you a roof over your head when I could have sent you to an orphanage, and this is how you repay me." Emma touched her stinging cheek, tears welling in her eyes. "Mother wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to become this monster. Don't you dare speak of her." Jeremiah raised his hand again, and Emma flinched, bracing for the blow, but it never came. "That's enough." The deep voice cut through the evening air like a knife. Emma looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. A stranger stood between her and her father, his stance wide and imposing. She could make out the shape of a cowboy hat atop his head and the outline of broad shoulders. "This isn't your concern, mister," Jeremiah growled. "This is family business." When a man raises his hand to a woman, it becomes everyone's concern, the stranger replied calmly, not budging from his position. As he shifted, Emma could see him more clearly in the fading light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that seemed to catch what little light remained in the day. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Jeremiah demanded, taking a menacing step forward. The stranger didn't flinch. "Quentin Walker. I've been hired as the new ranch hand at the Donovan place." His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the words. "And I'm not in the habit of watching men beat on their daughters." Emma slowly rose to her feet, unsure whether to run or stay. Her father's rage had found a new target, and she feared what might happen next. "Get off my property," Jeremiah snarled, his hand inching toward the knife at his belt. Quentin noticed the movement and shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." He didn't reach for his own weapon, but something in his stance suggested he was more than capable of handling himself. "This is my daughter, and what happens between us is none of your damn business." Jeremiah's voice rose to a shout. "It became my business when I heard her cry out while I was riding past." Quentin's gaze flicked briefly to Emma, then back to her father. "No man has the right to treat a woman that way, kin or not. I'll treat her however I please. She's mine until I say otherwise." Quentin's jaw tightened. "She's not property, Mr. Vance." Emma was startled that the stranger knew her father's name, but then realized that in a town the size of Genoa, Everyone likely knew of Jeremiah Vance and his infamous temper. Her father lunged forward suddenly, blade drawn, but his movements were clumsy from drink. Quentin sidestepped with surprising grace, catching Jeremiah's wrist and twisting until the knife fell to the ground. In one fluid motion, he pushed Emma's father back, maintaining his position between them. "She's under my protection now," Quentin said, his voice quiet but firm. Those words hung in the air, and Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a fragile bloom of hope that she'd long thought dead. Jeremiah regained his balance, fury and humiliation warring on his face. "You can't just take her." "I'm not taking her anywhere," Quentin replied, "but I'm not leaving her here to be your punching bag either." He turned slightly toward Emma without taking his eyes off her father. "Miss Vance, do you wish to leave?" Emma hesitated, 23 years of fear and obedience warring with her desperate need to escape. Yes," she finally whispered, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, "Yes, I do." "You'll regret this," Jeremiah spat, looking from Quentin to his daughter. "Both of you." Quentin remained unruffled. "The only thing I'd regret is walking away and leaving her with you." He bent slowly, keeping his eyes on Jeremiah as he retrieved the knife from the ground. "I suggest you go back to the house and sleep off that whiskey, Mr. Vance." For a tense moment, Emma thought her father might attack again, but something in Quentin's steady gaze seemed to penetrate even Jeremiah's alcohol-fueled rage. With a final venomous glare at them both, he snatched up his bottle and staggered back toward the house, muttering curses with each step. When he was out of earshot, Quentin finally turned fully to Emma. In the last light of dusk, she could see his features clearly, kind eyes the color of a summer sky, a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to smiling than frowning. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Emma touched her cheek, which was already beginning to swell. "I've had worse," she admitted, then straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for intervening, Mr. Walker, but you shouldn't have gotten involved." "My father doesn't forgive easily." "Neither do I," Quentin replied simply, "especially when it comes to men who hit women." An awkward silence fell between them. Emma realized she had no idea what to do next. She'd said she wanted to leave, but where would she go? As if reading her thoughts, Quentin spoke. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Emma shook her head. "Not in town. Everyone's afraid of crossing my father." Quentin considered this. "The Donovan Ranch has a small cabin for hired hands. I'm staying there, but Mrs. Donovan might let you use the spare room in the main house for a night or two." "I couldn't impose. It's not imposing when it's a matter of safety," he interrupted gently. "And Elizabeth Donovan is a kind woman. She won't turn you away." Emma hesitated, looking back toward the house where she'd spent her entire life. It had never truly been a home, not since her mother died of fever when Emma was 8. After that, her father had descended into drink and bitterness, his grief turning to anger that found its target in his only child. "I don't have anything," she said softly. "No clothes, no money." "We'll figure that out tomorrow," Quentin assured her. "For now, let's just get you somewhere safe." He led her to where his horse was tethered a short distance away, a handsome chestnut gelding that nickered softly as they approached. "This is Rusty," Quentin said, patting the horse's neck. "He's sturdy enough to carry us both to the Donovan place." Emma had ridden before it was impossible to grow up in Nevada without learning, but she still felt a flutter of nervousness as Quentin helped her mount. He swung up behind her with practiced ease, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She was suddenly very aware of his solid presence at her back, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Hold on," he murmured, and then they were moving through the gathering darkness, away from the only life Emma had ever known. The Donovan Ranch lay about 3 miles outside of town, a prosperous spread with good grazing land and a view of the mountains. By the time they arrived, night had fully fallen, and lantern light glowed warmly from the windows of the main house. Elizabeth Donovan was indeed as kind as Quentin had described. A handsome woman in her 40s with streaks of silver in her dark hair, she took one look at Emma's face and ushered her inside without question. "You poor dear," she said, leading Emma to the kitchen where she immediately began preparing a cold compress. "Quentin, there's stew keeping warm on the stove. Make sure she eats something." "Yes, madam," he replied, moving with comfortable familiarity around the kitchen, as Mrs. Donovan gently pressed the compress to Emma's cheek. Emma felt tears threatening again, not from pain, but from the simple kindness being shown to her. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said softly. Elizabeth Donovan's eyes were full of understanding. "Honey, you're not causing anything. That father of yours is the one who's been causing trouble for years." She glanced at Quentin, who was ladling stew into bowls. "It's about time someone stood up to him." "I'll fetch some of my daughter's things for you," Mrs. Donovan continued. "Sarah's away in Sacramento visiting her sister, but she's about your size. You can borrow what you need until we figure out what comes next." Emma felt overwhelmed by the generosity. "I can work," she offered quickly. "I can cook and clean and sew. We'll talk about all that tomorrow, Mrs. Donovan said firmly. "Tonight, you eat and rest." After a simple but hearty meal, Mrs. Donovan showed Emma to a small but comfortable bedroom. For the first time in years, Emma locked a door without fear, not to keep someone out, but simply because she could. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, Emma tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, her life had been completely upended. She thought of Quentin Walker, this stranger who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation, who had looked at her father without fear and declared her under his protection. Why would he do that? Men in Emma's experience wanted something in return for their kindness. Yet there had been nothing in his manner to suggest ulterior motives, only a straightforward decency that seemed as natural to him as breathing. Emma touched her bruised cheek and made a silent promise to herself. Whatever came next, she would not return to her father's house. Somehow, she would make her own way. With that resolution firm in her mind, she finally drifted into the most peaceful sleep she'd had in years. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, Emma was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her until the events of the previous evening came rushing back. She sat up, wincing at the tenderness in her cheek, and looked around in the clear light of day. The room was simple but clean, with a small dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. On a chair near the bed lay a stack of clothing dresses, undergarments, and a pair of sturdy boots that looked to be about her size. Emma rose and crossed to the washstand, pouring water into the basin to wash her face. The mirror above it revealed what she had expected, a purplish bruise blossoming across her right cheekbone. It wasn't the first such mark her father had left on her, but Emma found herself fervently hoping it would be the last. After washing and dressing in one of the borrowed dresses, a simple blue calico that fit her surprisingly well, Emma made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing and followed the scent to the kitchen. Elizabeth Donovan looked up from the stove where she was frying bacon and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Emma. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Emma admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in, Mrs. Donovan. Call me Elizabeth, please, and it's nothing any decent person wouldn't have done." She gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. The men have already had their breakfast and gone out to work. Emma poured herself a cup, savoring the rich aroma. I'd like to make myself useful if I may. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. I appreciate that spirit. There's always plenty to do on a ranch. She transferred bacon to a plate and cracked eggs into the hot fat. But first, eat something. We'll figure out the rest after. Over breakfast, Elizabeth explained more about the ranch. Her husband, Thomas Donovan, had built it up from nothing over 20 years. They had 2 grown children, Sarah, whose clothes Emma was borrowing, and a son named James who lived in San Francisco with his wife. The ranch employed several hands, including Quentin, who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier. Where did he come from? Emma asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than intensely interested. Elizabeth's eyes twinkled as if she saw right through the casual question. Montana, originally. He worked on several ranches up north before making his way down here. Thomas says he has a way with horses like he's never seen. He seems different, Emma said carefully. He is, Elizabeth agreed. Most men who have spent their lives on the frontier have a hardness to them. Quentin has strength, certainly, but there's a gentleness too. She studied Emma's face. He told us a little about what happened last night. Your father has quite a reputation in town. Emma looked down at her plate. I'm sorry. I know he's made trouble for many people. Elizabeth reached across the table and patted her hand. None of that is your burden to bear, Emma. You're not responsible for his actions. After breakfast, Emma insisted on helping with the household chores. She spent the morning washing dishes, sweeping floors, and helping Elizabeth prepare food for the ranch hands' midday meal. The work was familiar and comforting, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed all that had happened. Around noon, the men came in from the fields. Thomas Donovan was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and kind eyes that immediately put Emma at ease. He greeted her without prying, simply saying, "You're welcome here as long as you need, Miss Vance." Quentin was among the last to enter. His eyes immediately sought Emma, a question in them as he took in her bruised face. She gave him a small nod to indicate she was all right, and something in his expression relaxed. During the meal, Emma was conscious of his presence across the table. He spoke little, but she noticed how the other ranch hands seemed to respect him despite his relatively short time with them. He ate with a quiet efficiency, and when he did contribute to the conversation, his comments were thoughtful and often laced with a dry humor that made the others laugh. After the men returned to work, Elizabeth turned to Emma. I need to ride into town this afternoon to pick up some supplies. Would you like to come along? We could see about retrieving some of your belongings from your father's house. Emma's stomach tightened at the thought. I'm not sure that's wise. He'll still be angry. Thomas and one of the hands will accompany us, Elizabeth assured her. Your father wouldn't dare try anything with them present. Still, Emma hesitated. Most of what I own isn't worth the confrontation. Just a few dresses, some books that were my mother's. Those books might be precious to you, Elizabeth pointed out gently, and you have every right to your own belongings. In the end, Emma agreed. She couldn't live in borrowed clothes forever, and the thought of leaving her mother's few possessions behind was too painful to bear. An hour later, they set out in the Donovan's wagon with Thomas driving and a ranch hand named Miguel riding alongside. As they approached town, Emma's anxiety grew. Genoa wasn't large, just a single main street with a few side streets branching off, but it suddenly seemed impossibly small. Everyone would know what had happened by now. In small towns, news traveled faster than telegraph messages. Sure enough, as they drove down the main street, Emma felt the weight of curious stares. Elizabeth, sensing her discomfort, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Hold your head high," she murmured. You've done nothing wrong." They stopped first at the general store, where Elizabeth efficiently conducted her business while Emma tried to ignore the whispers that followed her. The storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Patterson, a notorious gossip, made a point of examining Emma's bruised face before asking in a voice that carried, "Had a bit of trouble at home, dear?" Before Emma could respond, Elizabeth smoothly interjected, "Emma will be staying with us at the ranch for a while. She's been kind enough to help me with household duties." The pointed look she gave Mrs. Patterson effectively ended that line of questioning. As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Emma spotted a familiar figure further down the street, Sheriff Daniel Burke, talking with the blacksmith outside his shop. The sheriff glanced their way, his expression unreadable, before deliberately turning his back. "The law in this town has always been selective about which problems it chooses to see," Thomas commented, following her gaze. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Emma could hear the underlying criticism. Their final stop was Emma's father's house, a small, weathered structure at the edge of town. Emma's heart pounded as they approached, but to her immense relief, there was no sign of her father. His absence gave her the courage to enter quickly, gathering the few items that mattered to her: 2 dresses, her mother's Bible and recipe book, a small wooden box containing her few pieces of jewelry, and a cherished photograph of her mother. As she was about to leave, Emma hesitated, then reached under her bed to retrieve a small tin where she had hidden what little money she'd managed to save over the years, just under $15, painstakingly accumulated from odd sewing jobs she'd done for neighbors when her father wasn't watching. They were nearly back to the wagon when a shout made them all turn. Jeremiah Vance was staggering up the street, clearly already deep in his cups despite the early hour. "Thief!" he bellowed, pointing at Emma. "Stealing from your own father." Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself between Emma and Jeremiah. "Mr. Vance, your daughter has taken only what belongs to her. Everything in that house is mine." Jeremiah's bloodshot eyes fixed on Emma. "You think you can just walk away after all I've done for you?" Emma clutched her small bundle of possessions to her chest but found her voice. "You've done nothing but hurt me since Mother died. I'm not coming back, Father." "You ungrateful!" Jeremiah lurched forward, only to find his path blocked by Thomas and Miguel. "That's far enough," Thomas said firmly. "Emma is staying with us now, and that's the end of it. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman who can make her own choices." Elizabeth spoke up, her arm protectively around Emma's shoulders. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with avid interest. Emma saw Sheriff Burke approaching slowly, seemingly reluctant to get involved. "There a problem here?" he asked, looking at Thomas rather than Jeremiah, despite the latter being the obvious source of the disturbance. "No problem, Sheriff," Thomas replied evenly. "Miss Vance is simply collecting her belongings." Sheriff Burke's gaze flicked to Emma's bruised face, then away. "Jeremiah, why don't you head on back to the saloon? No need for a scene in the middle of the street." "She's stealing from me," Jeremiah insisted. "I took nothing that wasn't mine," Emma said clearly, wanting the watching townspeople to hear. "Just my clothes and my mother's books." Sheriff Burke sighed. "Sounds reasonable to me, Jeremiah. Let it be." For a moment, it seemed her father might continue to make a scene, but something in the watching crowd, perhaps their lack of sympathy, seemed to penetrate his anger. With a final venomous glare at his daughter, he spat on the ground and turned away, stumbling back in the direction of the saloon. "Thank you, Sheriff," Thomas said, though his tone suggested he believed Burke had done the bare minimum. The sheriff nodded uncomfortably. "Miss Vance," he said, finally addressing Emma directly, "if you're sure this is what you want." "I'm sure," Emma replied, meeting his eyes steadily. With a nod, He walked away, and the crowd, disappointed that the entertainment had ended, began to disperse. "Let's go home," Elizabeth said softly, and Emma felt a rush of emotion at the word home, something she hadn't truly felt in 15 years. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma was relieved to have retrieved her few precious possessions, but shaken by the confrontation with her father. She hadn't expected him to simply let her go, but the public scene had been humiliating. As they turned onto the ranch road, Emma caught sight of a lone rider coming toward them, Quentin, astride Rusty. He slowed as they approached, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes going immediately to Emma. "A bit of unpleasantness in town," Thomas replied, "but nothing we couldn't handle." Quentin's gaze remained on Emma. "Your father," she nodded. "He wasn't happy to see me." Something hardened in Quentin's eyes. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Emma assured him quickly. "Mr. Donovan and Miguel made sure of that." Quentin seemed to relax slightly. "Good." He glanced at Thomas. "I've finished checking the north pasture fence line. There were a few weak spots, but I reinforced them." "Excellent work," Thomas approved. "Join us for supper." Quentin nodded, falling in beside the wagon as they continued toward the ranch house. Emma was aware of his presence just off to the side, the way he occasionally glanced her way, as if checking that she was truly unharmed. There was something both disconcerting and comforting about his protective attention. Disconcerting, because she wasn't used to anyone caring about her welfare. Comforting for exactly the same reason. That evening, after the chores were done and supper had been eaten, Emma found herself on the front porch of the main house, watching as twilight painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air was cool but not cold, fragrant with sage and pine. She heard the door open behind her and turned to see Quentin stepping out onto the porch. He had a folded blanket in his hands. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering it to her. "Evenings can get chilly." "Thank you." Emma accepted the blanket, draping it around her shoulders. It was warm and smelled faintly of cedar. Quentin leaned against the porch railing, his gaze on the distant mountains. For a few moments, they stood in companionable silence. "Elizabeth told me you're from Montana," Emma said finally. He nodded. "Born and raised on a small ranch near Bozeman." "What brought you all the way to Nevada?" A shadow passed across his face. "Change of scenery, I suppose." Emma sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their private pains. "I've never been anywhere but here," she admitted. "Sometimes I used to dream about what it would be like to just go anywhere." Quentin smiled slightly. "It has its moments, good and bad." "Was it worth it, leaving, I mean?" He considered the question seriously. "For me, yes, but leaving isn't always running away. Sometimes it's running toward something better." Emma thought about that. "I'm not sure what I'm running toward. I just knew I couldn't stay." "That's a start," Quentin said quietly. "Knowing what you don't want can sometimes help you figure out what you do want." They fell silent again, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Emma was acutely aware of his presence beside her, not too close, respectful of her space, yet somehow making her feel protected without being smothered. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For last night. For stepping in when you did." Quentin turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Emma contradicted him softly. "They wouldn't. People in town have known for years what my father is like. No one ever interfered." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Then they failed you. I'm sorry for that." The simple acknowledgement of what she had endured, not dismissing it, not making excuses, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "What will you do now?" Quentin asked. Emma drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm not sure." Elizabeth has said I can stay as long as I need to, but I don't want to be a burden. I need to find a way to support myself. You have skills, Quentin pointed out. I've seen how capable you are around the house, and Elizabeth mentioned you can sew. Emma nodded. My mother taught me. I used to do mending and such for some of the townswomen when my father wasn't watching. She smiled ruefully. He thought it was undignified taking in sewing. He had grand ideas about our social standing despite his habits. Pride can be a dangerous thing, Quentin observed. It blinds a man to his own failings. Were your parents kind? Emma asked suddenly, curious about the upbringing that had produced a man so different from her father. Quentin's expression softened. They were. My father was firm but fair. Never raised a hand to my mother or to us children. He taught me that a man's strength wasn't in his fists but in his character. And your mother? She was gentle but not weak. The kind of woman who could nurse a sick calf all night and still have breakfast ready at dawn. His smile turned wistful. She passed 3 years ago, consumption. I'm sorry, Emma said softly, understanding all too well the pain of losing a mother. Thank you. Quentin straightened from the railing. It's getting late. I should let you rest. Emma found herself reluctant to end their conversation, but she nodded. Good night, Mr. Walker. Quentin, please, he said. And good night, Miss Vance. Emma, she returned with a small smile. He inclined his head. Emma. The way he said her name softly, respectfully sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the blanket around her shoulders. As he walked back toward the bunkhouse, Emma remained on the porch, contemplating the strange turns her life had taken in just 24 hours. She had gone from a prisoner in her father's house to a woman with choices, however limited they might be for now. And she had Quentin Walker to thank for that initial step toward freedom. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both new and comforting to Emma. She threw herself into the work of the ranch, helping Elizabeth with cooking, cleaning, and mending. The activity kept her mind occupied and gave her a sense of purpose she had lacked for years. Thomas Donovan proved as kind as his wife, treating Emma with a fatherly respect that made her realize how warped her relationship with her own father had been. He never raised his voice, never made demands, and always thanked her for her contributions to the household. Emma saw Quentin daily, usually at meals and occasionally around the ranch as she hung laundry or gathered eggs from the chicken coop. Their interactions were brief but friendly, and each time she found herself looking forward to their next encounter with an eagerness that both excited and alarmed her. A week after her arrival at the Donovan ranch, Emma was hanging sheets on the line when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Sheriff Burke riding toward the house. Her stomach tightened with apprehension. Elizabeth emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron as the sheriff dismounted. "Daniel," she greeted him with cool politeness. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Burke removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Donovan, Miss Vance." He nodded to Emma. "I'm afraid I'm here on official business." "What kind of official business?" Thomas asked, walking up from the barn where he'd been working. The sheriff cleared his throat. "I've had a complaint from Jeremiah Vance. He's claiming his daughter stole money from him before leaving his house." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not true. He says there was nearly $50 missing from where he keeps his savings," Sheriff Burke continued, not quite meeting her eyes. "Says only you would have known where to look." "The only money I took was what I earned myself," Emma said firmly, anger replacing her initial shock. $15 that I saved from sewing work." "Can you prove it was yours?" the sheriff asked, though he seemed to already know the answer. Before Emma could respond, Thomas stepped forward. "Daniel, you know as well as I do what kind of man Jeremiah Vance is. Do you really believe he had 50 sober dollars to his name? The man drinks away every cent he gets his hands on. Sheriff Burke shifted uncomfortably. I have to follow up on complaints, Thomas. That's my job. Your job is justice, Elizabeth said sharply, not harassment. I'm not here to arrest anyone, the sheriff clarified, just to investigate the claim. And what exactly does this investigation entail? Thomas demanded. Before the sheriff could answer, another set of hoofbeats sounded. They all turned to see Quentin riding up on Rusty, returning from checking cattle in the south pasture. He took in the scene with a quick glance, his expression growing serious as he dismounted and approached. "Is there a problem?" he asked, coming to stand near Emma in what felt like a protective gesture. Sheriff Burke explained the situation again, his discomfort growing more evident as he faced yet another skeptical listener. "Let me understand this," Quentin said when the sheriff had finished. "You're taking the word of a known drunk and abuser over that of his daughter, who has never given anyone reason to doubt her honesty," the sheriff bristled slightly. "I'm doing my job, Mr. Walker." "Then do it properly," Quentin replied, his voice level but firm. "If Mr. Vance is missing money, perhaps you should ask where he was the night before he noticed it was gone. I imagine the poker table at the saloon might account for his stolen savings." Sheriff Burke flushed. "I don't need lectures on how to conduct my business." "Apparently you do," Elizabeth said coolly, "if you're willing to hound an innocent young woman based on the word of a man like Jeremiah Vance." The sheriff looked from one resolute face to another, then sighed, replacing his hat. "I'll look into it further," he conceded. "Miss Vance, I apologize for the disturbance." After he had ridden away, Emma's legs felt suddenly weak with relief and lingering anger. She sank onto the bench by the wash basin, her hands trembling slightly. "The nerve of that man," Elizabeth fumed, "coming out here on such a flimsy pretense." "He's always been too afraid of my father to stand up to him," Emma said quietly. "Most people in town are." Quentin sat beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" Emma nodded, straightening her shoulders. "I am. Just angry that even now, my father can reach out and try to drag me back under his control." "He won't succeed," Thomas assured her. "The whole town knows what kind of man he is. Even Daniel Burke won't push this nonsense too far." "And if he does," Quentin added, "he'll find he has more opposition than he bargained for." Emma looked at the three people gathered around her, Elizabeth's indignation, Thomas's steady resolve, Quentin's quiet strength, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it threatened to overwhelm her. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't facing her father's cruelty alone. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to express the depth of her feeling. Thomas patted her shoulder gently. "That's what family does, Emma. We stand together. Family." The word echoed in Emma's mind long after Thomas and Elizabeth had returned to their tasks. She hadn't had a true family since her mother died, and the idea that these people, virtual strangers just days ago, would consider her part of theirs was almost too much to comprehend. Quentin remained seated beside her, seemingly content to share the silence until she was ready to speak. "I should finish hanging the laundry," Emma said finally, standing up. "I'll help," Quentin offered, rising as well. She looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to do that. I know." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "But I'd like to if you'll allow it." Together they returned to the task, working side by side in companionable silence. Emma couldn't help noticing the contrast between Quentin's gentle efficiency and her father's perpetual impatience. Where Jeremiah would have cursed at the simplest domestic task, Quentin handled the damp sheets with careful hands, seemingly unbothered by work that many men would consider beneath them. "You've done this before," she observed as he expertly pinned a sheet to the line. Quentin nodded. After my mother fell ill, I helped with whatever needed doing. My father didn't believe any honest work was beneath a man's dignity. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Quentin handed her another clothespin. He would have liked you. The simple comment warmed her more than it should have. Why do you say that? He admired resilience, Quentin replied, glancing at her. The ability to face hardship without letting it break your spirit. Emma felt her cheeks flush slightly under his gaze. I don't feel particularly resilient. Most of my life I've just endured. There's strength in endurance, Quentin said quietly, and even more in finally saying enough. He reached for another sheet from the basket. It takes courage to leave what's familiar, even when it's harmful. As they continued working, Emma found herself sharing more about her life, her memories of her mother, the years of walking on eggshells around her father, the small ways she had carved out moments of peace for herself. Quentin listened without judgment, occasionally asking a question or sharing a brief anecdote from his own life. By the time the laundry was hung, Emma felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There was something healing about speaking her truth aloud and having it received with understanding rather than pity or dismissal. Thank you, she said as they gathered the empty baskets, not just for the help but for listening. Quentin's smile was gentle. Anytime, Emma, I mean that. As the days passed, Emma found herself gravitating more and more toward Quentin's company. Their conversations expanded beyond their pasts to their hopes and interests. She discovered he was well-read despite his frontier upbringing, having been taught by his mother, who had been a schoolteacher before her marriage. He, in turn, showed genuine interest in Emma's skill with needlework and her knowledge of medicinal herbs, learned from her mother's recipe book. 2 weeks after Emma's arrival at the ranch, Elizabeth approached her with a proposition. The church is holding its spring social this Sunday, she said as they prepared dinner together. Thomas and I would like you to come with us. Emma's hand stilled on the potato she was peeling. I'm not sure that's a good idea. My father will likely be there. All the more reason to go, Elizabeth argued gently. You can't hide away forever, Emma. This is your home too. Besides, she added with a twinkle in her eye, I happen to know that Quentin has agreed to attend as well. Thomas practically had to order him. Mind you, that young man would rather face a stampeding bull than a social gathering, but he'll be there. Emma tried not to look too pleased at this information. I have nothing suitable to wear to a social. Elizabeth smiled triumphantly. I thought you might say that. Sarah left behind a lovely blue dress that would fit you perfectly with a few alterations. It's just been sitting in the wardrobe gathering dust. Recognizing that Elizabeth had outmaneuvered her, Emma surrendered with a smile. All right. But I'll need to make those alterations quickly. The next few days were filled with preparations for the social. Emma spent her evenings adjusting Sarah's dress, taking in the waist and shortening the hem. The color, a deep blue that reminded her of twilight, flattered her fair complexion and brought out the gold in her hazel eyes. On Sunday morning, Emma found herself both excited and nervous as they prepared to leave for town. She hadn't been back to Genoa since the day she'd retrieved her belongings, and the prospect of facing the townspeople and possibly her father made her stomach knot with anxiety. As they assembled by the wagon, Emma was struck by how different Quentin looked in his Sunday best. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and well-worn but polished boots. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly beneath his best hat. The overall effect was striking, and Emma wasn't the only one who noticed. My, don't you clean up nicely, Elizabeth teased him. The young ladies of Genoa won't know what hit them. Quentin looked distinctly uncomfortable with the compliment, but his eyes found Emma's, widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely, Miss Vance," he said quietly. "Thank you," Emma replied, equally softly. And it's still Emma, remember. The church was already filled when they arrived, and Emma felt the weight of curious stares as they made their way to a pew. She held her head high, refusing to be intimidated, though she couldn't help scanning the congregation for her father's familiar figure. "He's not here," Quentin murmured beside her, seemingly reading her thoughts. "I checked." Emma relaxed slightly, grateful for his perceptiveness. Throughout the service, she was conscious of his presence beside her, the clean scent of soap, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing against hers, the deep timbre of his voice joining in the hymns. After the service, the social began in earnest. Tables had been set up outside the church, laden with food brought by the congregation. Children ran and played in the spring sunshine while adults gathered in clusters to gossip and catch up on news. Emma stayed close to Elizabeth initially, helping to arrange the dishes the Donovan household had contributed. She was aware of the sidelong glances and whispers, but Elizabeth's steadfast presence beside her made them easier to bear. Gradually, some of the townswomen approached, offering cautious greetings. Mrs. Patterson, the storekeeper's wife, was among the first. "You're looking well, Emma," she said, her eyes taking in Emma's appearance with open curiosity. "That bruise has faded nicely." "Yes, thank you," Emma replied politely. "Your father was in the store yesterday," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly fishing for a reaction. "Said some unkind things about you and the Donovans." Emma stiffened, but Elizabeth smoothly interjected. "I imagine Jeremiah Vance has said unkind things about most people in this town at one time or another. Fortunately, those of us who know Emma can form our own judgments." Mrs. Patterson had the grace to look abashed. "Of course, it's just, well, tongues have been wagging." "Let them wag," Elizabeth said firmly. "Emma is a valuable member of our household, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me or Thomas directly." As Mrs. Patterson moved away, chastened, Emma gave Elizabeth a grateful look. "You shouldn't have to defend me." "Nonsense," Elizabeth replied briskly. "Small towns run on gossip, but they also respect strength. Show them you have nothing to be ashamed of, and they'll eventually move on to more interesting topics." As the afternoon progressed, Emma gradually relaxed. She spoke with several people she had known all her life, finding that many were genuinely kind once they engaged with her directly rather than through the filter of gossip. The beautiful spring day, good food, and music provided by a local fiddler all combined to create a festive atmosphere that was difficult to resist. She noticed Quentin standing somewhat apart from the main gathering, looking about as comfortable as a cat in water. Smiling to herself, Emma made her way over to him, carrying a plate of food. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering him the plate. He accepted it with visible relief. "Thank you. These gatherings aren't exactly my natural habitat." "Mine either," Emma admitted. "But the food is good." They stood together in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the social unfold before them. "You seem to be holding up well," Quentin observed. "People appear friendlier than I expected." Emma nodded. "Most of them are decent enough. They just needed to see that I wasn't." She hesitated, unsure how to express it. "That you weren't defined by your father," Quentin finished for her. "Yes, exactly." She glanced up at him. "How is it you so often know what I'm thinking?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I pay attention." Before Emma could respond, the music changed to a lively reel, and couples began forming up for a dance in the cleared area beside the church. "Would you care to dance, Emma?" The question came from Robert Jenkins, the blacksmith's son, who had approached without her noticing. A pleasant young man about her own age, Robert had always been polite to Emma, even when others in town had avoided her due to her father. Emma hesitated, glancing at Quentin, who had taken a small step back. Thank you, Robert, but I'm not much of a dancer." "It's just a simple reel," Robert persisted. "Everyone's joining in." Sensing she couldn't politely refuse, Emma reluctantly agreed. As Robert led her toward the dancing area, she glanced back at Quentin, who raised his hand in a small gesture of encouragement. The dance was indeed simple, but Emma found it hard to focus on the steps. Her eyes kept straying to Quentin, still standing at the edge of the gathering. She noticed several young women eyeing him speculatively, and something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy flickered through her. When the dance ended, Robert thanked her and was immediately replaced by another partner, Andrew Miller, the banker's son. Emma danced with him as well, then with Thomas Donovan, who had claimed her for a slower waltz. "You're quite popular today," Thomas observed with a twinkle in his eye as they circled the dance area. Emma smiled ruefully. "I think they're simply curious. I've become an object of interest." "Perhaps," Thomas allowed, "but I also think many of these young men are seeing you clearly for the first time. You've bloomed since coming to us, Emma." The dance ended, and Emma found herself surrounded by several young women from town, including Mary Wilson, who had been a schoolmate years ago. "Emma, you must tell us what it's like living at the Donovan Ranch," Mary said eagerly. "Is it true that you're helping manage the household?" Emma nodded, somewhat bemused by the sudden interest. "Elizabeth has been very kind in teaching me the running of a ranch." "And that new ranch hand," another girl, Susanna Green, interjected with a meaningful look. "Mr. Walker, is he as serious as he looks?" Emma felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Walker is a hard worker and very skilled with horses," she replied neutrally. Mary giggled. "Oh, I'm sure he has many skills. He's the most interesting man to come to Genoa in ages." "Don't you think so, Emma?" Susanna pressed, watching her reaction closely. Before Emma could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal more than she intended, a commotion near the church gate drew everyone's attention. Her heart sank as she recognized the loud, slurred voice of her father. Jeremiah Vance stood swaying at the entrance to the church grounds, his clothes disheveled, his face flushed with drink. "Where is she?" he demanded, scanning the crowd. "Where's my ungrateful daughter?" The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. Parents gathered their children close, and several men, including Thomas Donovan, moved toward Jeremiah. "You're not welcome here, Vance," Thomas said firmly. "Go back to the saloon." "It's a public gathering," Jeremiah countered belligerently, "and I've come for what's mine." His bloodshot eyes finally located Emma among the crowd. "There you are." Emma froze as her father pushed past Thomas and staggered toward her. She was dimly aware of people stepping back, creating a space around them, but her attention was fixed on the man who had terrorized her for so many years. "Father, please," she said quietly. "Don't do this. Don't father me," he sneered. "Not after you stole from me and ran off with these high and mighty ranchers." "I didn't steal anything," Emma replied, struggling to keep her voice steady, "and I left because you gave me no choice." "No choice," Jeremiah's voice rose. "I gave you a home. I raised you after your mother died. You gave me bruises and fear," Emma countered, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "That's not a home." Her father's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little," he lunged forward, hand raised to strike her. But the blow never fell. Quentin appeared as if from nowhere, catching Jeremiah's arm in mid-swing and forcing it down. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You again," Jeremiah snarled, trying to wrench his arm free. The hero who thinks he can steal my daughter. She's not property, Quentin replied evenly, maintaining his grip. And she's made her choice. She's mine until I say otherwise. Jeremiah struggled harder, but Quentin held firm. She's her own person, Quentin corrected him. And she's under my protection now. I suggest you remember that before you try to lay hands on her again. The entire social had gone silent, everyone watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Even Sheriff Burke, who had been enjoying the festivities, stood frozen, seemingly uncertain how to intervene. "You threatening me, boy?" Jeremiah demanded. "No," Quentin replied calmly. "I'm making you a promise. Emma won't be hurt again by you or anyone else as long as I have breath in my body." Something in his tone, absolute certainty without bluster or bravado, seemed to penetrate even Jeremiah's alcohol-fogged mind. He glared at Quentin, then at Emma, before spitting on the ground between them. "You're no daughter of mine," he declared, wrenching his arm free at last. "You want her, Cowboy, take her. She's nothing but trouble anyway." With that parting shot, he turned and staggered back toward the gate, the crowd parting silently to let him pass. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Sheriff Burke cleared his throat. "I'll make sure he gets back to town safely," he said, hurrying after Jeremiah. As though a spell had been broken, people began to murmur and move again. Elizabeth was instantly at Emma's side, putting a supportive arm around her. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Emma nodded, though she felt shaky. "Yes, I'm fine." Her eyes sought Quentin, who still stood nearby, watching her with concern. "Thank you," she said softly. He inclined his head slightly. "Always." That simple word always sent a flutter through Emma's chest. Before she could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers, townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation and were now eager to express their support for Emma. "Your father was out of line," Robert Jenkins said firmly. "Everyone could see that." "We should have stepped in years ago," Mary Wilson's mother added, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, Emma." The minister, Reverend Collins, approached with a gentle smile. "Miss Vance, I hope you know that this church community stands with you. What we witnessed today only confirms what many have long suspected about your home situation." Emma was overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. All these years, she had thought no one cared or noticed, but perhaps they had simply been waiting for her to take the first step away from her father's shadow. The social resumed gradually, though with a subdued atmosphere. Emma found herself surrounded by people who seemed determined to make up for years of passive observation. It was both touching and slightly overwhelming. Eventually, sensing her need for space, Quentin appeared at her side. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked quietly. "Just to catch your breath." Grateful for his perception, Emma nodded. They slipped away from the main gathering, walking toward a small grove of trees behind the church, where the noise of the social faded to a distant murmur. "How did you know I needed to escape?" Emma asked as they reached the quiet shade of the trees. Quentin smiled slightly. "You have a look when you're feeling overwhelmed, a certain tightness around your eyes. You really do pay attention," she said, both impressed and touched by his observation. "To what matters?" he replied simply. They stopped beneath a large cottonwood, its new spring leaves rustling gently in the breeze. "What you said to my father," Emma began, then hesitated, unsure how to continue. "I meant it," Quentin said quietly. "Every word." Emma looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his eyes. "Why? Why would you put yourself between me and danger? First that night at the creek and now today. You barely know me." Quentin was silent for a moment, as though carefully considering his answer. At first, it was simply because it was the right thing to do. No one should have to suffer abuse, especially not from someone who should protect them. He paused, then continued more softly, "But now, Now it's because I've come to care for you, Emma, more than I expected, more than might be wise." Emma's heart quickened at his words. "Wise or not, I care for you too." Quentin took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't have much to offer. Just my hands, my heart, and a promise to never, ever hurt you." "That's more than anyone has ever offered me," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quentin raised his hand to gently touch her cheek, the one that had been bruised that first night. His fingers were calloused from work, but infinitely gentle as they traced the now healed skin. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips. In answer, Emma rose slightly on her toes, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they drew apart, Emma saw in Quentin's eyes the same wonder she felt. "We should probably return to the social," she said softly, though she made no move to leave. "Probably," Quentin agreed, equally reluctant. After another moment, they began walking back toward the church, not touching but close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. Emma felt as though something fundamental had shifted, not just in her circumstances, but in her very self. The frightened girl who had endured her father's abuse for so many years was giving way to a woman who dared to hope for happiness. As they rejoined the gathering, Elizabeth caught Emma's eye and smiled knowingly. Emma blushed, but couldn't help returning the smile. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur, and when it was time to return to the ranch, Emma found herself seated beside Quentin in the wagon, their shoulders touching as they swayed with the motion of the wheels. That evening, after dinner had been cleared away and the household was settling in for the night, Emma stepped onto the porch to find Quentin waiting, as though their meeting there had been prearranged. Without words, they sat side by side on the bench, close enough that Emma could feel the warmth of him against her arm. "Elizabeth mentioned that Sarah's letter came today," Quentin said after a comfortable silence. "She'll be returning from Sacramento next month." Emma nodded. "Yes. I'll need to find other arrangements by then. I can't expect to keep using her room." "You've been thinking about what comes next," Quentin observed. "I have," Emma admitted. "The Donovans have been incredibly kind, but I can't impose on them forever. I need to find a way to support myself." "What would you like to do if you could choose anything?" Quentin asked. Emma considered the question seriously. "I enjoy sewing and I'm good at it. I've thought perhaps I could offer my services more formally, not just mending, but making dresses, shirts, that sort of thing." "You'd need a place to live and work," Quentin pointed out. "Yes, I've been saving what little I had, and Elizabeth has insisted on paying me for helping around the house. It's not much, but perhaps enough to rent a small room in town." Emma hesitated. "Though I admit the thought of living so near my father is unsettling." Quentin was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "There might be another option." Emma turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I've been considering buying a small piece of land," Quentin said. "Thomas mentioned that old Jake Miller's place is for sale, the small homestead about 4 miles east of here. It's nothing fancy, just a cabin and a few acres, but it has good water and decent grazing." "You're thinking of settling here?" Emma asked, her heart beating faster at the implication. Quentin nodded. "I am. I like this valley, and I have compelling reasons to stay." His eyes met hers, and the meaning was clear. "Quentin, I'm not asking anything of you now," he hastened to assure her. "It's too soon, and you've only just found your freedom." "I wouldn't dream of—" Emma placed her hand over his, stopping his words. "I know you wouldn't." They sat in silence for a moment, the future stretching before them, uncertain, yet suddenly full of possibilities neither had dared imagine before. "Whatever you decide," Quentin said finally, "know that my promise stands. You're under my protection for as long as you want to be. Emma smiled, turning her hand to twine her fingers with his. And if what I want is to be under your protection forever. Quentin's eyes widened slightly, then softened with a warmth that made Emma's heart skip. Then, I would be the most fortunate man in Nevada territory. The weeks that followed were filled with work and planning. Quentin, with Thomas's blessing, pursued the purchase of Jake Miller's homestead. It was indeed modest, a two-room cabin with a small barn and corral, set on 5 acres of land with a year-round spring, but solid and full of potential. Emma, meanwhile, began taking on more formal sewing work. Word spread quickly through Genoa that Emma Vance was available for mending, alterations, and even custom garments. Her skill with a needle soon had her busier than she had anticipated, with a steady stream of work coming from townspeople who seemed eager to support her independence from her father. Jeremiah Vance himself had retreated into sullen isolation after the confrontation at the church social. He was rarely seen outside the saloon or his home, and when Emma did glimpse him in town during her infrequent visits, he pointedly ignored her existence. The pain of his rejection was real, but far less than the pain of his abuse had been. As May turned to June, the date for Sarah Donovan's return approached, and with it, the need for Emma to make decisions about her future. She and Quentin spent more and more time together, their bond deepening with each conversation, each shared moment of work or leisure. One evening, as they walked together near the creek that ran through the Donovan property, Quentin stopped beneath a towering pine and turned to face Emma. "I closed on the Miller place today," he said, a mixture of pride and nervousness in his voice. "It's officially mine." "Quentin, that's wonderful," Emma exclaimed. "When can you move in?" "Soon. There are some repairs needed first. The roof has a leak and the corral fence needs rebuilding." He hesitated, then reached for her hands. "Emma, I know it's only been a short time, but these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life." Emma's heart quickened. "For me as well." "I don't want to rush you," Quentin continued carefully. "You've only just gained your independence, and I would never want to take that from you." "You wouldn't be taking it," Emma said softly. "Independence isn't about being alone, it's about having choices." Quentin's eyes searched hers. "And if I were to ask what you would choose?" In answer, Emma reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I would choose you, Quentin Walker, today, tomorrow, always." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Then I have a question to ask you." He took a deep breath. "Emma Vance, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Emma replied without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Quentin gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "We should tell the Donovans," Emma said, suddenly eager to share their happiness. Hand in hand, they walked back to the ranch house, where Thomas and Elizabeth received their news with delighted congratulations. "I knew it from the first day," Elizabeth declared, embracing Emma warmly. "The way he looked at you like you were the sunrise after the longest night." "And the way you looked at him," Thomas added with a wink. "Like he was water in the desert." Plans were quickly made. The wedding would be small and simple, held at the church in Genoa with Reverend Collins officiating. Emma would wear a new dress of her own, making ivory silk, ordered specially from San Francisco through Mrs. Patterson's store. Quentin would wear a new suit, also made by Emma's skilled hands. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Emma divided her time between preparations and helping Quentin ready their future home. The work was hard but satisfying, each repair and improvement bringing them closer to the life they would build together. Word of their engagement spread through town with predictable speed. To Emma's surprise, The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Even those who had once whispered about her now offered congratulations and small gifts for their new home. Sheriff Burke, perhaps seeking to make amends for his earlier failures, personally delivered a wedding present, a finely crafted rocking chair made by his brother, who was a carpenter in Carson City. "For your porch," he said awkwardly. "Every home needs a good place to watch the sunset." The gesture touched both Emma and Quentin deeply, symbolizing as it did a kind of acceptance from the community that had once looked the other way. The question of whether to invite Jeremiah Vance to the wedding weighed on Emma's mind. Despite everything, he was still her father, and some small part of her wished for reconciliation. After much soul-searching, she sent him a simple invitation, expecting and half hoping he would decline. To her shock, he responded with a brief note, "I will attend." Nothing more, no congratulations or expressions of goodwill, but it was more than she had dared to hope for. "Are you sure about this?" Quentin asked when she showed him the note. "If his presence will cause you pain, we can ask him not to come." Emma shook her head. "No. I need to do this to close that chapter properly, before beginning our new one." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the late July sky a flawless blue. Emma dressed in the room that had been hers at the Donovan Ranch, Elizabeth helping her with the final adjustments to her dress and arranging her hair with flowers from the garden. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Quentin won't know what hit him." A knock at the door announced Thomas, come to escort Emma to the church in place of her father, who had not appeared at the ranch as arranged. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The church was filled with familiar faces, ranch hands from the Donovan place, townspeople from Genoa, even a few of Quentin's friends who had traveled from Montana for the occasion. As Thomas led her down the aisle, Emma's eyes were drawn to Quentin, standing tall and handsome beside Reverend Collins. The look on his face as he saw her, wonder, love, and a touch of awe, was one she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. When Thomas placed her hand in Quentin's, the warmth of his touch steadied her, grounding her in the moment. As they exchanged their vows, Emma was conscious of a profound shift within herself. The frightened girl who had lived in her father's shadow was truly gone, replaced by a woman standing proudly beside the man she loved, promising to share his life as an equal partner. It wasn't until they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife that Emma spotted her father, standing at the very back of the church. Their eyes met briefly, and she thought she saw something flicker across his face, regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of what he had lost through his own actions. The moment passed, and then Quentin was leading her back down the aisle, out into the sunshine where their friends waited to congratulate them. The celebration that followed at the Donovan Ranch was joyous and relaxed. Food and drink flowed freely, music and laughter filled the air, and Emma found herself surrounded by genuine goodwill. Her father did not attend the reception, having slipped away after the ceremony, but his brief presence at the church had been enough an acknowledgement, if not a blessing. As the sun began to set, Quentin found Emma talking with Mary Wilson and her mother. With a smile and a polite excuse, he drew his new wife away from the gathering, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the same cottonwood where they had shared their first kiss. "Happy, Mrs. Walker?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Emma smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." "Good," Quentin murmured, bending to kiss her softly, "because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." As dusk settled over the land, they made their goodbyes and departed for their new home. The cabin had been transformed in the weeks leading up to the wedding, the roof repaired, the walls freshly whitewashed, new curtains at the windows and a braided rug on the floor. It was simple but welcoming, the beginning of all they would build together. Quentin lifted Emma over the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. For a moment, they simply stood together, taking in the reality of their new life. "Welcome home, Emma Walker," Quentin said softly. Emma reached up to touch his face, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Home," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." And as night fell over the Nevada landscape, two people who had once been strangers found in each other the belonging they had both been seeking, a love built not on dependency or control, but on mutual respect, shared strength, and the promise of protection freely given and gratefully received. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy. Emma's sewing business flourished, with orders coming not just from Genoa but from neighboring settlements as well. She converted the second room of their cabin into a workshop, filled with fabrics, threads, and the steady rhythm of her sewing machine, a wedding gift from Thomas and Elizabeth Donovan. Quentin divided his time between working at the Donovan Ranch and developing their own small property. He added 2 milk cows and a small flock of chickens to Rusty's companionship. And by the following spring, they had a thriving vegetable garden and had cleared enough land for a modest wheat field. Their home grew too, with a lean-to kitchen added to the back of the cabin, and a wide, covered porch across the front complete with Sheriff Burke's rocking chair, where they often sat in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Emma saw her father occasionally in town, their encounters brief and strained but no longer filled with fear on her part or rage on his. Jeremiah Vance seemed to have aged a decade in a single year, his drinking taking an ever greater toll on his health and appearance. In late autumn of their first year of marriage, Emma learned she was with child. The news filled both her and Quentin with a mixture of joy and trepidation, joy at the new life they had created together, trepidation at the responsibility that came with it. "We'll need to add another room to the cabin," Quentin said practically, even as his eyes shone with undisguised happiness. "And I'll need to cut back on my sewing work, at least for a time," Emma added, already calculating how they would manage with the reduced income. But these were happy problems, the kind that came with building a life rather than merely surviving one. Throughout the winter months, as Emma's body changed with her growing child, Quentin worked on the cabin expansion, creating a snug bedroom for their expected arrival. Elizabeth Donovan, herself a mother of 2, became Emma's guide and confidante during the pregnancy. She shared wisdom and reassurance, old wives' tales and practical advice, helping to ease the young woman's natural anxieties. "Every first-time mother feels unprepared," Elizabeth assured her during one of their regular visits. "But you have love and a good heart, and those are the most important things a child needs." Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, and with it came the birth of their son, a healthy, sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the world with unmistakable vigor. "What shall we call him?" Quentin asked, cradling his newborn son with a tenderness that brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Thomas," she suggested, "after the man who has been more of a father to me than my own." Quentin nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Thomas Walker, a good, strong name." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, their little homestead prospered as well. Quentin's careful management and hard work meant that each season saw improvements: a larger barn, more livestock, expanded fields. Emma's sewing business, temporarily reduced during Thomas's infancy, flourished anew as she found ways to work while also caring for their son. Life was not without its challenges. A late frost damaged their wheat crop one year. A mountain lion took 2 of their chickens before Quentin managed to track and kill it. Thomas fell ill with fever one winter, giving his parents several terrifying days before he recovered. But these trials were faced together, each challenge met with the combined strength of 2 people who had found in each other not just love but partnership. When Thomas was 3, Emma's father fell seriously ill. Despite their strained relationship, she visited him regularly during his final weeks, sitting by his bedside in the small house where she had spent so many unhappy years. Jeremiah said little, but there was a softening in his manner, a quiet acceptance of her presence that felt, if not quite like reconciliation, at least like peace. "He looks like you," Jeremiah said once when Emma had brought Thomas with her. "Got your mother's chin, though." It was the closest he came to acknowledging his grandson, but Emma treasured the moment nonetheless. When Jeremiah Vance passed away a week later, she mourned not so much the father he had been, but the father he might have been had grief, and whiskey not twisted him into something harsh and violent. The small house and its contents came to Emma, his only heir. After some discussion with Quentin, she decided to sell the property. The proceeds, modest though they were set aside for Thomas's future education. "A new beginning from an ending," Quentin observed as they watched the new owners, a young couple just starting out, move into the house. "Your father might have approved of that in his better moments." Life continued its steady rhythm. Their homestead grew more prosperous with each passing year, and their family grew as well. When Thomas was 5, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after the woman who had shown Emma what true motherhood looked like. 2 years later, another son joined their family, Robert, a quiet, thoughtful baby who grew into a boy with his mother's artistic temperament and his father's steady hands. The town of Genoa changed too, growing larger as more settlers arrived, bringing new businesses and ideas. Emma's sewing shop, which had outgrown their cabin and moved to a small building in town, became known throughout the region for quality and craftsmanship. Quentin's reputation as a horseman and rancher grew as well. He had an instinctive understanding of animals that others recognized and respected, and his advice was increasingly sought by neighbors facing challenges with their own livestock. Through it all, their partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. The promise Quentin had made that first night, "She's under my protection now," had evolved into something far deeper, a mutual safeguarding of each other's hearts, dreams, and well-being. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Quentin surprised Emma with a gift: the deed to 10 additional acres adjoining their property, land that would allow them to expand their growing ranch operations. "For our future," he said simply as he presented it to her, "and for the children's future." Emma's gift to him was equally meaningful, a handcrafted quilt she had secretly been working on for months, each square representing a significant moment in their life together. The creek where they first met, the church where they wed, the cabin that became their home, the births of their children. "So we never forget how far we've come," she explained as he ran his fingers over the intricate stitching. That evening, with their children asleep and the house quiet around them, they sat together on the porch that had been one of their first projects, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the vast Nevada sky. "You ever think about that night?" Emma asked softly. "When you rode past our place and heard my father shouting," Quentin nodded, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Often. I think about how close I came to just riding by. I was tired, eager to get back to the bunkhouse. If I hadn't heard you cry out." "But you did," Emma said, resting her head against his shoulder. "You stopped. You stepped between us." "Best decision I ever made," Quentin murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Mine too," Emma agreed. choosing to leave with you that night, choosing to trust you. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds around them, the distant call of a coyote, the soft whickering of horses in the barn, the gentle creaking of the house as it settled for the night. "Are you happy, Emma?" Quentin asked suddenly, echoing the question he had asked her on their wedding day. Emma smiled, thinking of all they had built together, their home, their family, their love that had only deepened with time and shared experiences. She thought of the frightened young woman she had been and the confident mother and businesswoman she had become. She thought of Quentin's unwavering support, his gentle strength, his absolute belief in her abilities. "Yes," she said simply, turning to meet his gaze. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." "And you?" Quentin's smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "More than I have words to express." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, talking softly of the past they had shared and the future still to come. Their children would grow, their ranch would prosper, and they would face whatever challenges life presented together, just as they always had. In that moment, under the vast canopy of stars, Emma felt a sense of completion that went beyond mere contentment. The circle that had begun with fear and violence had transformed into something beautiful, a life built on love, respect, and the simple promise of protection, freely given and joyfully returned. And as Quentin took her hand, his fingers twining with hers in a gesture as familiar as breathing, Emma knew with absolute certainty that this man, this life, this love was exactly where she was meant to be.